Welcome. Today we're looking at Jacob and how he ends up with two wives who are sisters, Leah and Rachel. We see how the promises originally given to Abraham and Sarah about land, descendants, and a blessing to the whole world, how they start to work their way through Jacob, Leah and Rachel. One of those promises, descendants like stars, as many as the stars, certainly takes off through these relationships. Jacob is running away. His big brothers threaten to kill him for stealing his birthright and blessing. And his mum wants him to find a wife from amongst her side of the family. So Jacob comes to the well outside Haran. And I thought he was a bit of a homebody, but turns out he both knows all about good stock work. He doesn't like the way they're working their sheep. He thinks they could be getting far more out of them. And when everyone gathers and waits for enough people to get together to be able to roll the heavy rock off the top of the water, Jacob just comes and does that by himself and waters Rachel's flock, the flock of his cousin. This woman at the well motif, we saw it earlier on with Jacob's mother, Rebecca, when she accepts the wedding contract offered to her for the unknown on behalf of Isaac, whom she hadn't yet met. And now it's Rachel. Later on it's going to be Moses and Zipporah. When Moses' life is a total mess, he runs away from being the prince of Egypt because that hasn't worked out for him, runs into the wilderness. There on the edge of the desert he meets a woman who's watering her flock. He helps her, becomes part of the family and marries her. And finally, in John chapter 4, we have Jesus and the woman at the well. He asks for a drink of water. She gives him that, and he ends up offering her living water. And through the beautiful exchanges there, we see how her whole life is changed and turned around. And Jesus really is like the bridegroom of her soul. Rachel brings Jacob home. Jacob tells the whole story to his uncle Laban. And you got this odd phrase, wow, you're my family, my flesh and bone. And it turns out that Laban likes his style, and maybe in Laban he's actually met his match in terms of trickiness and willing deceit. So we come to the marriage business. One of the commentators I read said as a child, because the older translations had Leah had weak eyes, she said the subconscious message was, if you're less attractive, you have to trick someone into marrying you. If you're beautiful, you just get your choice. Whatever, there's a business deal between Laban and Jacob for Rachel. But we don't know if the women actually know about that deal. Is it for Rachel? Is it for Leah? Laban is actually quite tricky in his wording. He just leads Jacob on, but he doesn't specifically say, yes, here's the deal, you work 7 years, I'll give you Rachel. The wedding party is a men's only event, and the trickster Jacob gets tricked. He was blind to the deceit, and he wakes up in the morning and there's Leah in the marriage bed. So we don't know if the women were a part of the plan, and we don't know if Leah believed that Jacob had actually contracted to marry her, or whether she's just hoping that, okay, he loves my sister more, but if I'm good and stick with him, he'll love me a bit. She certainly desperately wants his love and respect. And the question in the text is, will he learn to love this woman who he's married to? Will he learn to show her respect and care? God gets involved. Leah's fertile, pops out babies one after another, 4 of them. Rachel is not. In fact, there's no child for Rachel until the next 7 years is paid for her bridal price. Leah's namings. That tells us exactly what's going on for her. Reuben, look, it's a son. This is a sign that God has seen my misery and a sign that now my husband will love me. Simeon, God heard. God heard that I was unloved, and now I've produced another boy. Levi, connect. Now maybe my husband will reach out to me and connect with me. I've given him 3 sons. Finally, Judah, praise God. This time I'll praise God. Some commentators have said, yes, she's finally starting to understand that she needs to look to God and listen to God rather than just wanting approval from Jacob. But it's not that simple, and she's still desperate for his attention. And so we get to the great baby off. And the question is, who's running this show? Which of the women are in charge, or is Jacob in charge, or is it just a whole difficult combination of all their wants and desires and actions? Leah stops having children. Rachel doesn't have any. She's jealous. She blames Jacob. Jacob says, not my fault, it's a God issue. So Rachel goes for the surrogacy option, uses her slave Bilhah, like Abraham had done with Sarah. And Bilhah gets pregnant. A boy, Dan, vindication. I've done the right thing. She gets pregnant again. Naphtali, I'm in a fight with my sister and I've won. Look, 2 babies. Meanwhile, Leah isn't getting pregnant. So she says, good enough for my sister, it's good enough for me. She gives her slave Zilpah to Jacob. Incidentally, we're not told what the slave women thought. Zilpah gets pregnant. Gad, I am lucky. How fortunate. And she gets pregnant again. Asher, happy. This is a happy day. Leah says, the women will congratulate me on my happiness. And then we get the business with the mandrakes. Reuben finds these mandrakes in the field unexpectedly, and they are understood to have aphrodisiac properties. So Rachel really wants them. This will help her to get pregnant. They do a deal. Leah scores Jacob for the night. She prays. She gets pregnant. Issachar, bartered. I thought she's bartering with her sister, but she sees God rewarded me for giving my maid to my husband. And then she gets pregnant for the 6th time. Zebulun, honoured. God's given me a great gift. This time my husband will honour me with gifts. I've given him 6 sons. And finally, her last pregnancy is a daughter, Dinah. Eventually, Rachel is pregnant. She calls him Joseph, meaning he adds. And it's really a prayer for another pregnancy. Let God add another son to me. And after all this, after 14 years and all these children, Jacob wants to go home. But he's not allowed to, and we'll explore that next week. Guess I feel a lot of compassion for Leah. She's put in a very difficult situation. She desperately wants love. And somehow she stays in there, the relationship, having to deal with husband who doesn't love her and respect her as much as she deserves, and certainly in tension or fight with her younger sister. This pain gets transformed literally into new lives. And so we see these promises about God for descendants like the stars fulfilled in quite unexpected ways. And somehow God's in that, even though they're not role models for what healthy relationships and good family life is about. Eventually, one of Leah's sons, Judah, gets blessed by Jacob. This is Jacob's dying blessing. Your father's son shall bow down before you. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. Out of Judah comes King David, and from the descent from King David comes Jesus of Nazareth, the Lion of Judah, he's called in Revelation. So it's from Leah, who's the great grandmother of Jesus. And it's through Leah's line through Judah that the blessing for the whole world to be blessed comes into practice. In the very end, Leah dies back in the Promised Land, with her giving birth to her second and final son. She gets buried on the road near Bethlehem where they are. Much later, Leah dies. She gets buried in the family burial cave, the plot that held Abraham and Sarah, and it's a plot where Jacob and Esau bury their father Isaac. Much later, down in Egypt, where Joseph is ruling, Jacob dies and his final instructions are, take my body back and bury it back in the burial cave where my grandparents are and where my parents are and where Leah is. So in death, Leah and Jacob end up together. Jacob and his wives are not great role models. Yes, the people of Israel are descended from them. But there's a lot of lessons to be learnt and a lot of life to be lived. And yet God's grace and God's mercy still works in them and through them. And God doesn't give up on us, even when we don't get things right or do it in a good way. God still works and God still shares his goodness with us.